Watch this. A perfectly seared ribeye, beautiful crust, that deep mahogany bark. And the moment it comes off the heat, we slice straight into it. And there it goes. Every single drop of juice floods the cutting board. The steak is suddenly tighter, drier, and half the flavor is just sitting in a puddle. That is not bad luck. That is molecular biology punishing impatience. And by the end of this video, you will never make that mistake again. Today, we are going deep on one of the most misunderstood moments in all of cooking, the rest. Not because some chef on TV told you to do it, but because understanding the actual science behind it will change how you cook meat forever. We are talking protein mechanics, moisture migration, and I'm going to share a fine dining technique that professional kitchens use to push resting even further than you thought possible. Stay with me, because the last tip in this video is the one most home cooks never hear. So, let's start with what's actually happening inside a piece of meat while it's cooking. Muscle fibers are made up of long protein strands bundled together, and those strands are surrounded by moisture, the natural juices, myoglobin, dissolved proteins and fats that give meat its flavor and its succulence. The moment heat hits that muscle, something called protein denaturation begins. The fibers start contracting, tightening, squeezing inward like a fist closing around water. The hotter and faster you apply heat, the more aggressively those fibers contract. And here's the key thing nobody explains clearly. That contraction pushes all of the moisture toward the center of the cut, not out of the meat, toward the center. Picture squeezing a wet sponge from the outside in. All that liquid migrates inward toward the cooler core. Now here's where the magic of resting actually lives, and this is the part I want you to hold in your mind. When you pull that steak off the heat, the outside is much hotter than the inside. Heat is still traveling from the surface toward the center through carryover cooking. As that temperature gradually equalizes across the entire cut, those tightly contracted muscle fibers begin to relax, and as they relax, they reabsorb the juice that got pushed inward during cooking. The moisture redistributes evenly throughout the entire piece of meat. Slice it at that moment, and the fibers hold on to most of that juice. Slice it too early, while those fibers are still contracted and that liquid is pulled in the center, and it all runs out the second a knife breaks through. Now, how long should you actually rest? This is where I see people get it wrong in both directions. Too short and you lose the juice. Too long and you lose the heat. Here's a reliable rule from professional kitchens. Rest your meat for roughly half the time it's spent on heat, loosely tented with foil. A 12-minute seared steak, 6 minutes of rest. A 2-hour roast chicken, give it at least 45 minutes.
A full brisket that cooked for 12 hours? That brisket wants a minimum of 1 hour resting, ideally 2. And the pros will tell you to rest it wrapped in butcher paper inside a cooler where you can hold its temperature and continue that moisture redistribution for longer without going cold. That is not a rumor. Competition pitmasters swear by it. And now here is a pattern I want you to notice, because it shifts how you think about every cut of meat differently. Thick cuts need more rest than thin ones, obviously. But the more connective tissue and collagen a cut contains, the more resting also allows that freshly rendered collagen to reset slightly and hold the structure of the meat together as you slice. A well-rested brisket slices clean. A brisket cut too soon crumbles and falls apart because the gelatin is still liquid and loose. Resting is not just about juice, it's also about texture and structural integrity. Now for the butcher's secret, and this is the one that fine dining kitchens use that most home cooks never think about. The next time you cook a thick cut, we're talking tomahawk, bone-in ribeye, a whole stripe loin, after you pull it from the oven or the grill, rest it on a wire rack, not a flat board. Why? Because resting meat flat on a surface traps radiant heat underneath. The bottom of your steak keeps cooking against the hot board while the top is losing heat to the air. You get uneven temperature throughout. A wire rack lets air circulate completely around the meat, evening out the temperature drop, which means the muscle fibers relax more uniformly and your redistribution of juice is more complete. It's a small change with a genuinely noticeable result. There's one more thing I promise to tell you, the fine dining technique that takes resting to the next level. It's called a reverse butter-based rest, and here's how it works. When your steak comes off the grill or out of a screaming hot cast iron pan, instead of tenting it plain, you place it on a wire rack over a tray, lay a generous knob of compound butter, something like a garlic and thyme butter, directly on top and tent it loosely. As the butter melts over the resting meat, it coats the surface and slows the surface heat loss, giving the interior more time to equalize before the outside cools completely. You get the flavor of a butter baste, the moisture retention of a proper rest, and the steak arrives at the table with a glossy, aromatic surface that looks like it came straight from a Michelin kitchen, because it did. This is exactly what they do. So here is the full picture. Heat forces moisture to the center. Resting allows fibers to relax and reabsorb that moisture evenly. The right rest time depends on the size and type of the cut. A wire rack rest beats a flat board, and a compound butter tent takes it from great to extraordinary.
Every one of those steps is rooted in actual food science, the same science that separates a dry, disappointing piece of meat from something that makes people go silent at the table. The next time someone tells you resting is optional or that slicing immediately keeps the heat in, you now know that's wrong on a molecular level. The juice you save with 5 minutes of patience is the difference between a steak that's good and one that is genuinely unforgettable. If this video changed how you think about cooking meat, drop a comment. I want to hear your best or worst resting story. We've all been there. Hit like if you learned something today. Subscribe to the Meatz so you never miss a video. And next time, we're getting into dry aging at home. What actually happens to meat over 14 days and whether the result is worth every minute of waiting. You won't want to skip that one.